far south gradually start to push their way offshore, so turning a little drier for much of England and Wales into the start of Monday morning. Perhaps the odd outbreak of rain across the very far southeast, but further north, a much drier picture and plenty of clear skies on offer for Northern Ireland and much of Scotland. And likely to turn quite chilly here, perhaps a touch of frost in places, but generally staying that little bit milder under that cloud further south and further east, temperatures in the high single figures. So a bright but chilly start across parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland, a cloudier start across England and Wales, but that cloud gradually starting to fizzle out as we go through the afternoon. So some sunshine developing here, maybe one or two isolated showers, but it should be staying dry for most places. That sunshine turning hazy across the northwest though as we see this weather front arriving, so some heavy downpours across northwest Scotland, and temperatures will be down a touch on what we saw over the weekend, but still a little above average for the time of year.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
Because
the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff.
Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood.
So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, I just posted about the event on Facebook, basically. It snowed the night before, and I thought, oh, wouldn't it be funny if... It was purely for a joke. I posted it on the meme student page. Yeah, it was purely a joke. Just wouldn't it be funny if the two unis, Uni of the Polytechnic, had a big, massive sort of Lord of the Rings style battles at the park, snowball fight. And then I woke up the next day and just looked out the window because I live near the park and saw that hundreds of people were there. I was like, oh wow. But I really didn't expect it to be like that. And then they say, we want to come down to the station. I was like, okay, am I under arrest? Have I committed a crime? They don't answer that. They just say, we'd just like to come down to the station. And I was like, okay, do I have to? It's like, you don't have to, but if you don't, we're going to make you eventually. Yeah, we had this really, really nasty, uncomfortable interview with the two officers that conducted it. Where they not only tried to antagonize me, incriminate me, but also blame me for deaths of thousands of people around the country.
Just give us that detail, Zen, because didn't they say to you about something about a number of people who had died of COVID since your snowball fight? Yeah.
Like, so nationally, they it was like, do you know in the business meetings where someone writes down a figure and they slide it across the table and you look? That's what they did. He wrote down like 3,000 or so people. Or he wrote down the number 3,000, slid it across the table and said, Mr. Watts, do you know what this number means? And I was like, no. Like, this is the number of people that since your snowball fight have died from COVID-19. How does that make you feel?
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
please bring us up to date.
Or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. A big week in Westminster with Liz Kendall's welfare reforms, and another big week set to come with the Chancellor's spring statement on Wednesday. Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, will join me to reflect on that as the government announces today £600 million worth of investment to train up to 60,000 more skilled construction workers. Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, Mel Stride, will be here. What are his predictions for the Chancellor's spring statement? And should Rachel Reeves resign if we go into recession? Former Conservative leader Sir Ian Duncan Smith, the man who introduced universal credit, will be joining me in the studio. I'll be getting his reaction to those welfare reforms. Did they go far enough? I'll also be joined by the former head of the British Army, Lord Dannatt. I'll get his thoughts on the fire that shut down Heathrow Airport on Friday. And we'll also discuss the latest from the front line in the Ukraine-Russia war. And Senior Fellow at the Centre for Policy Studies, Gerard Lyons, will join me to assess how badly British businesses have been impacted by the budget ahead of the spring statement this week. As ever, we've got 90 minutes of punchy politics to come. Do not even think of going anywhere. But before all that, with me now to review the Sunday front pages is Chief Political Correspondent at The Times, Aubrey Allegretti. Aubrey, lovely to see you this morning.
Good morning,
well, understandably, the spring statement stroke emergency budget, which is what the Tories are calling it, and I shall ask Mel Stride why a little later, is dominating the front pages, and talk of Reeves taking the axe to the civil service in the Sunday Telegraph. Tell me more.
Yeah, I think the Treasury's feeling like they've been buffeted slightly off course, and so they're trying to seize the narrative and show people that it's not all sort of doom and gloom, and that they are actually sort of trying to take the helm here. So the Sunday Telegraph reports that the civil service is going to be ordered to save about £2 billion a year in administration costs. Now, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, was slightly remiss to be drawn this morning on how much that would sort of save in terms of overall civil servant jobs, but eventually she suggested it would be about 10,000 civil servant jobs. So a bit of a drop in the ocean in terms of the numbers of civil servants, which have obviously been rising fairly steadily now for over a decade. So she's going to try and bring that down.
I do remember the Tories pledging to scrap 91,000 civil servants. Never happened. In fact, the numbers went up in the last couple of years of the last administration. So we're now at 515,000 full-time. Back in 2016, we were at 380,000. We haven't lost a lot of the civil servants that got involved in Brexit and indeed in COVID. And yet, I don't know about you, Aubrey, but I don't think the state is running more efficiently because there are more civil servants in place. Is this just the whole Labour shtick of saying we're going to take an axe and actually just taking a penknife?
I mean, they obviously talk more broadly about spending cuts, and so they want to sort of demonstrate that they are trying to reduce waste within the system and sort of increase productivity. But it is, you know, a significant ask. If you're cutting government departments' budgets by up to 11% year on year, which is what non-protected departments have been asked to model, how do they expect those departments to sort of function with fewer staff? I'm not sure ministers have been entirely open about what they think the civil service will do less of.
Yeah.
They say, you know, it'll all be met by productivity reforms. But, I mean, do we really expect those to sort of be manifested in the way the government hopes?
Or it'll be AI. AI will do these jobs, but nobody ever says quite how or why or how that would even happen. How's the left-wing media sort of reacting to this? Because there is an irony here. If you're going to shave 11% off non-essential departments, that, in all manner of speaking, is an austerity cut, right? But, of course, Labour won't package it like that.
Absolutely. I mean, it is interesting to read in The Observer today. They've got a report about living standards allegedly diminishing over the course of this Parliament. They say that comparing 2030 with 2025, the average mortgage holder is set to pay about £1,400 more in interest annually, and the average renter about £300 per more in rent a year. That's according to a report by the, obviously, left-wing Joseph Rowntree Foundation. And there's an interesting sort of line in here written by the political editor, which says that this casts doubt on Keir Starmer's claim that he is not returning the UK to austerity. So I think that will be the charge levied at Rachel Reeves by some of Labour's more left-wing MPs who've been feeling slightly disempowered, not really brought in and sort of consulted as part of the negotiation process of things like the welfare cuts that we saw announced on Tuesday. So I think some of them are willing to put down a marker next week and voice their discontent a little bit more openly. He
seems to be perhaps falling victim to a bit of a pincer movement. As you say, some of the left-wing backbenchers who aren't happy about this. Then we've got another story in the papers, not that we're going to go into it now, but some red wall Labour MPs talking about tweaking our relationship with the ECHR, which is not a very Starmerish thing to do. So it's just interesting how this will land on Wednesday. And, of course, GB News will be keeping you abreast with events in Westminster. Let's move on to the Heathrow story, because you know, there's now a probe has been launched by Ed Miliband into why there wasn't enough backup power for Heathrow. We've got the boss of Heathrow, the CEO Thomas Waldby, saying that he's proud of the way that the team has reacted to this crisis. I'm not sure if you would use that word if you were lugging a suitcase and a family around Heathrow for the whole of yesterday, but...
No, absolutely. I mean, obviously, I think he's sort of reflecting more broadly that some people thought this was the sort of catastrophic kind of error that could have crippled Heathrow's capacity for longer. And so I suspect he's trying to sort of reach to a point that he's glad they managed to get the systems back relatively quickly. But for all of those affected, obviously it's been really frustrating. The papers are quoting people who've been sort of fleeing to try and make a wedding in time.
Yes.
So, I mean, what this probably does is, even if it wasn't foul play, which we're told it wasn't, is identify a sort of huge hole, created in the sort of nation's vulnerabilities.
Yes.
So I suspect this is a big sort of advertisement for, if you want to, cause trouble on this scale, both travel disruption and, of course, the economic consequences that flow from it. That's obviously the picture that's been painted here.
Also, apparently, a report warned 10 years ago that they didn't have enough backup energy. I'll be speaking to General Dannatt about this because I feel the tone has changed from yesterday to today. Not as much talk about terrorism, sabotage and things, but the question is how many other areas of key infrastructure could be vulnerable. I mean, it might be an accidental fire, but it's also been exposed that there wasn't that much security around this particular facility.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like they sort of got away, luckily, if you like, with this happening by accident, it seems, rather than there being sort of nefarious intentions behind it. But it should be a wake-up call. And there was a report, The Sun on Sunday reports, that said that basically an incident like this would happen once every 346 years. So obviously freak accidents do happen, but it does expose the sort of vulnerabilities in our critical national infrastructure.
Especially worrying at this time of sort of global unrest. Now, this is an interesting story in The Telegraph. School scraps Easter service to respect other religions.
Absolutely. We're told that a primary school has scrapped its annual Easter celebration and service in order to respect diverse religious beliefs. I mean, this is a sort of a concurrent complaint that you hear from some parts of the media about a sort of dialing back of religious celebrations in favour of kind of something that's a bit more inclusive, or maybe making other people feel as though they're not kind of just identifying one celebration and excluding others. But
Winterfest instead of Christmas.
Exactly, yes.
I don't know why we can't just honour all religious celebrations rather than excluding some.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, so this primary school, which is in Eastleigh in Hampshire, basically sent a note to parents saying that they wouldn't be holding their bonnet parade for Easter, nor the Easter service as well. The head teacher who wrote the letter says that this is because of the school's respect for diversity and its aim to create a more inclusive atmosphere. So I'm sure parents will respond to let us know if they think that it should be.
Surely an inclusive atmosphere is one which celebrates all religions rather than toning down Christianity in favour of another because of so-called offence. I mean, I don't think I've been offended by a religious festival as a good lapsed Catholic in my life, Aubrey. I don't know about you.
It's quite a nice part of school to be able to sort of celebrate other cultures as well.
I used to love making the Easter bonnet back in the day, decorating eggs and all the rest of it. Honestly, what has the world come to? And on that subject, this is interesting in the Mail on Sunday. Farage's outrage after union urges teachers to educate pupils who vote for, quotes, racist reform. This is about the National Education Union, set to demand at next month's annual conference that pupils are taught that reform is far-right and racist. Thoughts, Aubrey?
I mean, it is interesting. The unions sort of often pass these sorts of motions and they can create quite a lot of havoc for the Labour government. And now the NEU isn't known for necessarily being the Labour Party's best friend at the moment. But this would obviously be quite damaging and raise questions for Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, about whether she'd agree, whether she'd distance herself from it, whether this is the sort of thing that unions should sort of be preoccupying their time with. But obviously, Nigel Farage, I'm sure, will sort of relish the attention. He's hoping for maximum publicity in the run-up to the Runcorn by-election, saying that he's going to be spending quite a lot of time outside London over the next few weeks. So, I suspect that, this won't really come to anything, but ultimately it makes life quite difficult for the Labour government.
And a very quick word on the sub-story on that page. As he clashes with GB News over its coverage of feud with Rupert Lowe. Now, apparently Nigel is not happy with his own channel's coverage of this row. Your thoughts, Aubrey? Because at the end of the day, We must report without fear or favour when it comes to any party leader, even if he also presents on this channel. And to be fair, that story, with his row with Rupert Lowe, merited a great deal of journalistic attention.
And it was conducted so publicly. I mean, you know, what do you expect when you've got sort of barbs being fired over Twitter and letters being written like that? It made the whole thing so much kind of easier to cover because it wasn't being conducted in private conversations in back rooms like this disagreement probably should if you were the spin doctors.
GB News is aware that it has a lot of Reform supporters that want to know more details about this story, and therefore it behoves us to cover
all sides of the story, which you covered wonderfully.
Thank you very much, Aubrey Allegretti. Lovely to see you this morning. Well, coming up next, I'm going to be speaking to Rachel Reeves' deputy, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones. He'll be joining me. Don't go anywhere. This is the Camilla Tominey Show, only on GB News.
I hope it doesn't rain.
Don't worry about it.
It'll spoil our holiday.
Relax, we're totally covered.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
After a wet and windy couple of weeks for Spain and Portugal, there's some dry weather on offer and plenty of sunshine across the eastern Mediterranean too. Still some showers affecting the far north of Spain and Portugal and some heavy downpours across parts of Italy and Croatia over the next couple of days. But across the eastern parts of the Mediterranean, parts of Turkey and Cyprus, plenty of sunshine on offer. The best of the sunshine through the rest of the week, though, definitely across the Canary Islands, and highs here likely to reach around 21 or 22.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Exciting news. Every Friday, my Patrick Christie's Tonight Show is going to have a twist to it. We're welcoming some special guests. You. That's right, on Fridays I'm going to be doing my show in front of a live studio audience because this show is about you and what you have to say. It's going to be the same big debates, same big topics, same big opinions, but every Friday night at 9 p.m. you are invited to come on down to Patrick Christie's Tonight to be a part of the action. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation,
no,
isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff.
Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood.
So join me on Jubes and Kerr weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Joining me now is the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones. Lovely to see you this morning, Mr. Jones. I know you've got a busy week ahead. Before we get on to talking about the spring statement, can we just have a chat about Heathrow? The CEO, Thomas Waldby, has said he's proud of his team. Do you agree?
Well, good morning, Camilla. Look, I'm sure the team at Heathrow responded in line with their normal policies in response to a critical incident like the one we saw. But evidently, we need to do this review that the Energy Secretary has announced with the energy regulator and system operator to understand why there was a single point of failure in the way there was for this fire at the substation, resulting in Heathrow, a critical piece of national infrastructure, having to close in the way that it has. I'm sure there are some lessons there that can be learnt, and we'll be working with the operators at Heathrow as well as with our regulators to make sure that we do so.
Has the government ruled out sabotage now? Because there seems to be less dialogue about it being about perhaps a terrorist threat or indeed the work of an outside agent.
I'm not briefed on that information, I'm afraid, Camilla, so I can't tell you. I mean, I'll have to refer you to comments from Number 10 and the Department for Transport. But of course, when we think about the resilience of our critical national infrastructure, we have to consider all of the different issues that may be in play, from climate through to security and policing issues in the way that you've described.
OK, let's get on to subjects you can talk about. The Times had leaked a letter that you've written to government departments in the week calling for the, quotes, ruthless prioritisation of government spending. You're talking about real-term cuts of between 5.7 and 11.2% to government departments, unprotected departments. So that's all departments really apart from the Department for the Ministry of Defence and indeed the Department for Health. In what world isn't this austerity?
Well, it's not austerity because we're increasing the amount of money we're putting into our public services. There was a huge increase at the budget in the autumn last year, £100 billion of additional capital investment, £40 billion of additional tax rises going straight into frontline public services. That was a big injection of spending because we needed to get a grip of public services after the mess that we found them in from the last Conservative administration. But I think the letter you're referring to, Camilla, is the letter that I issued to start the spending review at the end of the last calendar year. And we have asked departments to plan against certain scenarios, but we've not come to any conclusions yet. We're going to be in the middle now of negotiating those spending plans. It's right that we're looking line by line at every pound that government spends. The first time that's been done in 17 years. And we want to make sure that we're modernising the state so that it's achieving better outcomes for people in the future at a lower cost.
OK, but if you're modelling up to 11.2% in cuts, then some departments could have to cut by that much.
Well, as I say, that's not a decision that has been taken. They're what we call planning assumptions, where we ask departments to look line by line through what they're spending and to come back with different kind of buckets of critical spend, low value for money for spend, spend that might be in relation to priorities of the last government that's not a priority for this government. And we're now just working through that process of negotiation, where we're looking at those results line by line. And we publish the public spending plans in June. They will all be geared towards delivering our plan for change, the priorities that this government was elected on to deliver for people across the country.
Although government spending will still be around 45% of GDP by the end of this Parliament. So it's not really bringing government spending down at all overall.
Well, that's my point. That's why it's not austerity, because we are increasing spending into public services. But that doesn't mean that there are not difficult decisions elsewhere in the public sector to take. One of the things that we've been speaking about today and this week, for example, is the public sector is still quite unproductive. We have a lot of old IT systems. There's a lot of things still done on paper. Anyone that's trying to engage with public services knows that it's quite difficult to do so. And we just know from looking at the private sector, there's a huge amount of opportunity there to improve productivity, to free up cash and to invest that back into frontline public services.
So it's a bit like the welfare cuts that weren't really cuts, they're just a growth reduction.
Well, the welfare changes were a reflection of the fact that the welfare system, as designed, was not being operated in that way. That's why they've needed to be reformed, to make sure that we're supporting people to get into work, and for people who are the most severely disabled or who can't work, that they get appropriate support too. It's right that we look at these systems, whether it's welfare or the administration of the state or public service spending, to make sure that we're being as effective and productive as possible, because that's what people would expect us to do when we're using their money.
I know, but government spending in 2024 to 25 as follows. Benefits, £314 billion. That's bigger than the health budget, £202 billion. So when you say you're going to cut £5 billion from benefits, all you're really saying is that growth from now till 5 years' time isn't going to be £49 billion, it's going to be £45. It's just a growth reduction, it's not a cut at all, is it?
Well, partly, Camilla, you'll recognise that we are an ageing population, so we're not having as many babies, basically, as our parents and grandparents did. So we've got more older people who are coming into their pension age. They're able to obviously draw down their pension, and that's why the pensions cost of the Department for Work and Pensions budget is growing, because we've got more people claiming their pensions. They're entitled to do so, and we have to pay for that. But where there has been system failure or kind of design failure in policy elsewhere, we do also need to get a grip of that, which is what we're doing.
But you've also got a problem with not enough young people in work. The number of young people claiming benefits now has shot up. You're asking people to come off benefits and go into work, and yet Rachel Reeves came up with a budget in the autumn which has absolutely clobbered businesses. Businesses are now saying we're reluctant to hire because we're paying far too much in national insurance contributions. So you're trying to get people into work, but you're not facilitating businesses to hire them. You're clobbering business.
Well, we've increased national insurance contributions that employers have to make. That is true. But we've seen from the jobs figures over the last quarter a growth of nearly 200,000 new additional jobs in the labour market here in the UK. That is a good thing. And the important thing for younger people who are out of work and being stuck on universal credit, not being able to get into work, is that we need to help them to be able to get better if they're sick. Often that's about access to mental health services. But also we need to make sure that they've got access to the training and skills that they need to have to get into work. That's why we've announced today, for example, our construction package. We think we can get 60,000 additional jobs in engineering, bricklaying, electrical and carpentry skills by supporting the construction industry. That's exactly the type of outcome we're trying to achieve for young people across the country.
Well, yes, if construction firms can afford to take new staff on. We've got 300,000 SMEs saying that they plan to lay off workers because of the budget. We've got the number of companies listed on Companies House down for the first time since 2012. We've got 203,000 businesses having folded since Labour took power. And there's also been a 15.5% drop in new businesses starting up. So the budget has been anti-business, hasn't it?
Well, not if you look at the fact that, as I say, there's been nearly 200,000 additional new jobs created in the economy.
Can you look at my figures that I've just cited?
Sure, and we're exchanging figures, as we often do in these political interviews. But look, you only need to talk to businesses about where we're taking this country in terms of its policy direction. You can see already in the weekend papers, which I'm sure you've been reviewing on your show, really positive feedback from CEOs and company investors about the UK being a stable place to do business, a country that has a clear mandate and a policy for growth in the economy, where a government's willing to get in and work alongside business. And that's what we've done with this construction task force. I mean, the package has been built alongside the construction industry. This is endorsed by businesses in the construction industry. They tell us that the policies we've announced today will help them to hire more people, to train more people, and the fact that we're going to get on and work with them and investors and play our part with public spending where it's relevant to get those houses built, to get that infrastructure built, that creates the circumstances for which you can employ people and pay them for their good jobs that they're doing and help the economy grow. That's a good thing.
I don't know what CEOs the Treasury's been speaking to. We do a section on this show every week where we speak to small and medium-sized business owners to find out how they've been affected by the budget. Not one person has come forward, who runs a small or medium-sized business, to say they've been positively affected by the budget. We've spoken to people in hospitality, we've spoken to people in retail, we had 2 hairdressers in last week. They've been absolutely clobbered. So I don't know, what business owners are you speaking to? Because we haven't spoken to anybody who has this narrative that everything's great with business in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, look, we want to go further and faster on the economy. We recognise we need to get more growth into the economy and to help businesses to do that. But as you would expect, we talk to businesses of all sizes, big companies, like I said, in the construction industry, all the way through to SME and startup builders who we want to support to be able to get houses built in this country. And, you know, it's worth remembering that in the budget, the national insurance changes for employers was designed in a way to protect smaller businesses. It's right to say that 50% of businesses in this country will either be paying the same as or less than they did before, because we took that step to try to protect smaller businesses in what I recognise was a difficult budget for business, but allowed us to honour our pledge to not increase payslip taxes that people pay when they go to work, or VAT in the shops, whilst getting a grip of the mess that we'd inherited from the Conservatives.
All right, a quick word on net zero. The business department came out with a report this week which was leaked to The Sun. The report showed that net zero will impact negatively on GDP by 2030 by 10%, increase national debt, increase the risk of a financial crisis and hit the poorest the hardest. Why on earth are you proceeding with it?
Well, I've not seen that report, but what I would say from what you've asked me is how you do net zero is important. When you're talking about energy security, when you're talking about jobs in the energy sector, when you're helping people's homes be protected from flooding or resilient to extreme weather, that can be a good thing for the economy, it can be a good thing for jobs, it can be a good thing for people and businesses, but you've got to do it in the right way, which is what we're focused on doing.
All right, Darren Jones, we need to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Coming up next, I'm going to be getting the response to that from the Conservatives. Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, will be joining me. I'll also be speaking to Sir Ian Duncan Smith, former Tory leader, and Lord Dannatt about the situation in Russia and Ukraine. This is the Camilla Tominey Show, only on GB News. Don't go anywhere. Lots more to come in the next hour.
You could have £17,777 in tax-free cash to play with this spring. Cash to spend on anything you like. And if that wasn't enough, we're also going to give you not 1, but 2 sought-after designer watches and the latest Mulberry handbag. How would winning that sound? For another chance to win the lot, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB12 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 4th of April. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Paul, I have to say, good on you for joining us tonight. Did you know that we were going to give you such a hard time?
Well, it's certainly provoked some discussion, and the purpose actually of the naming of the streets was to recognise the significant medical pioneers that worked at that hospital over 100 years and often contributed to medical innovations that reduced the fact that we, no longer have infectious diseases so widespread in our population. So my original idea was actually to try and save the buildings and the amazing architecture of the hospital. Unfortunately, it was demolished despite my efforts. So when the new housing estate was being built, the idea turned to how to name those streets. My original idea was actually to name the streets after the medical pioneers and the researchers that worked at the hospital. But unfortunately, the Glasgow City Council came back and said that after recent controversies with naming conventions, after people who have turned out to be controversial, they no longer name streets after people alive or dead. So I have to go back.
Hang on. I can't let that go that easily, Paul. Right, so they wouldn't name it after maybe a scientist who of renown and success, in case at some point somebody said, oh, that scientist was a historic sex offender, and then you'd have to change the name of the street. Are you serious? Virology Grove, Radiography Road. I mean, what do the
residents say? Are they embarrassed when people say, where do you live? Vaccine drive.
Well, I think people are happy to have good quality housing in the area, but also it's provoked intrigue, it's provoked curiosity about the history of the site, and given there's so little physical evidence of the original hospital left, at least thousands of people now know about this really important social history that might otherwise not. So maybe sometimes having quirky, somewhat provocative names will elicit interest.
Well, they're not
it wasn't what I
provocative, they're
originally wanted to
stupid,
name them
Paul.
that.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Lots more still to come on the show this morning. I'm going to be speaking to the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, Mel Stride. Should Rachel Reeves resign if the economy goes into recession? Former Work and Pensions Secretary Sir Ian Duncan Smith will also join me. I'm going to be getting his reaction to the welfare reforms announced by Liz Kendall in Parliament this week. And the former head of the British Army, Lord Dannatt, will be here. I'm going to be asking him for the latest updates in the Ukraine-Russia war, as well as what he made of that fire that shut down Heathrow on Friday. And Senior Fellow at the Centre for Policy Studies, Gerard Lyons, will be here to offer his predictions ahead of the Spring Statement on Wednesday. But first, here's your latest news headlines from Sam Francis.
Camilla, thank you very much and good morning to you at just after 10 o'clock. The top story, well, an urgent investigation has been launched into the substation fire that caused mass flight cancellations at Heathrow Airport on Friday. Energy Secretary Ed Miliband says the probe will examine the UK's energy resilience to prevent it from happening again. Thousands were stranded after nearly 1,400 flights were hit and over 16,000 homes were lost to power. Counter-terrorism police are now leading inquiries but say it's not being treated as suspicious. The airport is now fully operational and the former Transport Secretary Ruth Kelly will lead a separate review into Heathrow's own response. Failed asylum seekers could be sent to the Balkans under early-stage government plans to set up overseas return hubs. Those centres would house people whose asylum claims and appeals have been rejected, including those who can't be returned to unsafe countries like Iran or Somalia. Payments would be made to host countries, with current proposals focused on Albania, Serbia and Bosnia. The move follows a similar idea floated by the EU and comes after the Prime Minister scrapped the Rwanda scheme. Charities, though, warn the plans are unworkable and inhumane, but ministers insist they must be affordable, legal and effective. The government is planning a £2.2 billion annual cut to civil service admin costs by 2029 under major cost-saving drives. Departments will be told to slash spending on HR, communications, policy and office management by up to 15%. Frontline services are being protected, though, but unions warn thousands of jobs could be at risk. They're urging ministers to come clean about which services will stop altogether. It comes ahead of Rachel Reeves' spring statement on Wednesday as pressure is growing to balance the books without raising taxes. Donald Trump's envoy has rubbished Sir Keir Starmer's Ukraine ceasefire plan, calling it posture and pose. In a Tucker Carlson interview, Steve Witkoff praised Vladimir Putin, calling him super smart and not a bad guy. He also claimed Ukraine is a false country and backed Kremlin arguments on occupied territory. But when pressed, he failed to name the 5 Ukrainian regions under Russian control. Witkoff says a Black Sea ceasefire could be in place within a week. And Pope Francis will leave hospital today after battling double pneumonia that put his life in danger. Doctors have confirmed he will be leaving later. The 88-year-old will return to the Vatican but needs at least 2 months of rest and still struggles to speak clearly. He was never intubated, and remained alert throughout his 5-week stay in hospital. He'll be offering a public blessing from his window later before being discharged, and it marks his first public appearance since being admitted in February. That's the news on GB News. A full roundup from me here in the newsroom at 11 o'clock. Now, though, it's back to Westminster and Camilla.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sam. Lots more still to come today. Former Work and Pensions Secretary and former Tory leader Sir Ian Duncan Smith will be here in the studio to give his reaction to the welfare reforms announced this week. Plus, former head of the British Army, Lord Dannatt, will join me. But first, joining me now is the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, Mel Stride. Lovely to see you this morning. Thank you for your time. How come you're calling this an emergency budget rather than a spring statement? That's not what Rachel Reeves is calling it.
Well, no, what Rachel Reeves wants everybody to believe is there's nothing to see here, but we couldn't be further from that. The distinction, Camilla, is that a fiscal event or an emergency budget is when you've really got to make big changes to the country's finances. And in this case, because this government has killed growth stone dead and her fiscal headroom, as it's called, the margin against her targets, has probably evaporated entirely. And that's leading to really what is going to be a much bigger event than what would be a spring statement, which would be simply standing up and effectively reading out what the OBR is saying in terms of its latest forecasts.
What are your predictions for what we're going to hear on Wednesday then?
Well, so I think given that what we've seen is a government that's come into office, talked down the economy, killed the animal spirits in the economy, talked about this fictitious black hole that they keep going on about, but the OBR has debunked, given that they've layered taxes, huge taxes on businesses and the impact that that's having, given that they borrowed and spent like they're back in the 1970s, that's pushing up inflationary pressures. That means interest rates higher for longer, higher costs for mortgage holders, higher costs for businesses. And of course, it also means that on our national debt that they've added to substantially, the costs of servicing that debt have been rocketing up as well. We're at about 100 billion a year, which is twice what we spend on defence. So to answer your question with that as a backdrop, I'm afraid I'm expecting that a lot, if not all, of her fiscal headroom will have disappeared, and she's going to have to explain to us how she's going to make that up, which might lead her into some decisions that are going to be potentially quite painful for a lot of people.
For people watching and listening to this, though, Mr. Stride, they may be scratching their heads wondering what's different between her budget and indeed the last Tory one. Who should really take the blame for the state of the economy today, considering that the Conservatives were in power for 14 years before Rachel Reeves?
So I think the nature of what has happened here is different as between when we were in office and what is happening now. And the key distinction is, of course, we had massive external challenges to our economy. We had COVID, which shrank the UK economy by over 10% overnight, the biggest contraction since 1709 and the Great Frost. We then had huge inflationary pressures from the war between Ukraine and Russia. We had to get inflation back under control, which we did. It was bang on target on the day of the last general election. What this government actually has done is simply what I described: talked down the economy, loaded up businesses with taxes, borrowed and spending an awful lot of money that's pushing up inflation and interest rates. So it's very different. What this government is doing is these are challenges and difficulties that are of their making, and they really started with that autumn budget in October of last year.
And look, I've made the point to Darren Jones in an earlier interview about the business bashing budget. Take that aside, and we can also criticise the Tories for bashing business with a 6% increase to corporation tax. But let's just leave that to the side for now. You say it's different. It's not all that different.
Well,
go on.
Okay,
corporation tax. You're going to bring it down if you get into power.
Yeah, well, we'll look at all taxes, and we will certainly be looking at lowering the tax burden and doing things for the tax system to encourage business.
But you didn't when you were in power.
But on corporation tax, it was 20. Well, we did actually, because it was 25% in 2010 when we first came into power. We actually got it down to 19% before the kind of external impacts on the economy that I've described happened. The overall tax burden, you're right, for the reasons that I've explained of COVID and so on, it has been rising. But what we've got to do is get that historically high tax burden down. What this government is doing, if you look at all the forecasts, is not only have they got the highest tax burden at the moment, but they're going to be adding to that. It's going to be growing and getting even greater over the next 5 years. So we have got to reverse that, absolutely.
OK, but back to my point. When you say, oh, it's very different, we're predicting now government spending being 45% of GDP by the end of this Parliament. Under Boris Johnson, it was 45.4% of GDP. We've now got a situation where the civil service is at 515,000. The Tories pledged to cut the civil service by 91,000, and actually the numbers went up. So it's more of the same, really, from Labour, isn't it?
Well, on the point about the size of the state, those figures that you've mentioned there, Camilla, of course, what was happening under Boris Johnson was started under Boris, we spent about £400 billion making sure we didn't have the kind of mass unemployment that many were predicting at that time, that COVID shut down huge swathes of the UK economy. And we also spent quite a lot of money supporting some very vulnerable people, millions of vulnerable people who would otherwise have found it very difficult under the high levels of inflation that were imported because of the war in Europe. So I think there were particular circumstances there. But you're absolutely right. We have got to start getting the tax burden down. But this government is not doing that. What it is doing is borrowing ever more money, spending vast amounts of money, and taxing the living daylights out of business. And what that ultimately means is a smaller economy, and it means that people up and down the country struggle that much harder to make ends meet, because living standards, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation today have just issued a report. Their analysis shows that actually the average family will be £1,400 worse off by the end of this Parliament than they are at the moment. And that's because you take those decisions, I'm afraid.
I know. I mean, I love this idea of a Tory minister now quoting the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. The next thing we know, we're going to have Tory ministers attacking Labour over food banks in this topsy-turvy world. Rachel Reeves will rightly argue that living standards fell under the Conservatives.
Well, there were challenges around living standards for the reasons that I've given. Very high inflation, which was not something that we created here in our economy. It was something that came through higher energy prices and increases in inflation, which happened to many countries around the world. But for the last 13 months, in the run-up to the last general election, real wages, for example, have been increasing in every single month. We had the fastest growing economy in the G7, near record level of employment, near record low level of unemployment. And as I say, we got inflation down from over 11% at the back end of 2022 to bang on target at 2% on the day of the general election. So those were huge challenges, but I think we were making a great deal of progress. It's only taken this government, Camilla, 9 months to completely unwind all of that and leave us in a very precarious situation as an economy.
So global forces made inflation go up, but the Tories take the credit for it coming down.
Well, no, it coming down was a result of both the Bank of England and monetary policy, which required higher interest rates. But what government certainly did was to accommodate that on the fiscal side. That's the spending side. So what we had to do as a government was to make sure we allowed monetary policy to work, but to have an accommodative fiscal policy. So we had to take tough decisions, for example, on public sector pay increases. OK, that's one of the ways in which we got inflation down. This government, when they got in, 14% for train drivers, 22% for junior doctors, no requirement for improvements to productivity, no strings attached, and that's why you have inflation staying higher for longer and interest rates higher for longer, which hurts people with mortgages, businesses trying to invest, and costs us more on servicing our national debt. That's the distinction here.
Is it your view that we are in a per capita GDP recession right now? Or GDP per capita recession, I should say?
Yeah, GDP per capita is declining at the moment. We have GDP, which is incredibly flat, and given changes in the size of the population, it is the case that that is happening, and it's happening on this government's watch.
So therefore, and I've asked you this before, and you were a little bit ambivalent in your answer, if we go into a full recession, shouldn't the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, resign?
So, look, going around, Camilla, I remember we had a long series of you asking this question over and over last time. Going around and asking, and demanding.
It's a perfectly reasonable
yes, it is, but I'm going to give you a completely... I'm going to give you a perfectly straight answer. And the perfectly straight answer is that running around demanding the resignation of all sorts of ministers left, right and centre is not the way that we're going to do our duty by this country. The way we do our duty by this country is to hold this government to account, to expose their failings, to push them to do the right kind of things, and in the longer term, over the next months and years, to do the hard, deep thinking to make sure we come up with the solutions for our country that we can take to the electorate of the next general election in a way that allows us to prevail and come back into government and do the right things instead of the wrong things that this government's doing.
A final question on your right-wing comrades in reform, Mel Stride. The National Education Union wants to table a motion that teachers teach school children that reform is far right and racist. Do you think reform is far right and racist?
No, I think to apply that as a general comment to any political party that's part of the democratic process and has representatives in Parliament is wrong. I mean, if it is exactly as you present it to me, I haven't seen this story and had a chance to look at it closely, but no, I would, on the face of it, disagree with that.
Yeah, it's in the Sunday Telegraph. It's as I've presented it, Mel Stride. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Look forward to hearing more from you, I'm sure, on Wednesday on GB News. All right, take care now. Thank you. Well, there we have it. Coming up next, we're going to be speaking to the former Work and Pensions Secretary, but also, of course, former Conservative Party leader, Sir Ian Duncan Smith, about those welfare cuts. But he also wants to say something quite strident, I believe, about China. And I'll also be speaking to Lord Dannatt about the situation in Ukraine and Russia. Don't go anywhere, still lots more to come. Back in a jiffy.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there short and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hello everyone, Patrick Christie's here with an exclusive opportunity just for you, our incredible GB News viewers. We're giving you the opportunity to win a VIP studio tour right here at GB News HQ. Plus, you'll also get to meet yours truly. It's easy to enter, just head to gbnews.com/community competition and follow the easy steps. Don't miss out, enter now, and I'll see you soon at GB News. Full T's and C's apply.
The royal family is an enduring symbol of tradition, unity and pride for Britain. At GB News, we celebrate what makes this country great. In our new royal newsletter series, you can join me, Cameron Walker, for Inside the Palace, an exclusive look every week that takes you beyond the gates and brings you the very latest from those at the heart of the monarchy. Never miss a royal moment again. Sign up now. Go to gbnews.com/royal newsletter and get the latest straight to your inbox.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation,
no,
isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff.
Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood.
So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. With me now in the studio is the former Conservative leader and Work and Pensions Secretary, Sir Ian Duncan Smith, MP for Chingford and Woodford Green. Lovely to see you this morning.
Camilla, always good to be here.
Let's talk China. Because I know you're concerned that the Energy and Climate Change Secretary, Ed Miliband, is basically benefiting Beijing with this quest to have more solar panels, more wind farms and more electric vehicles. Kemi Badenoch gave a speech in the week where she abandoned that net zero by 2050 pledge, saying that it only plays into communist China's hands because they produce most of this stuff and we import it in. Tell me about this amendment that's been tabled to Miliband's GB energy bill.
It's due back on Tuesday, and the Lords amended it. Interestingly, Labour peers voted to put this in, and it essentially is very simple. It's about 3 lines, and it says that GB Energy are not allowed to invest or purchase any product made from China or anywhere, actually, by slave labour. And that says simply, no slave labour in the supply chains. Now, what's interesting about this, we know that the polysilicon involved in the solar arrays is made in Xinjiang.
Yes.
That is made by slave labour. There's a genocide taking place there. So the men that have been put into these slave labour camps are producing that. We know that one of the reasons why China has gone from nowhere on net zero to suddenly the dominant player in the world is because they break the WTO rules because the banks subsidise their industries. But really worse than that is that they are rampant users of slave labour in many products that people, without realising it, buy, but in solar arrays and also in the wind turbines, lots of that stuff is made by slave labour. They know that in the government. Every government knows this now. There's a beginning of a crackdown in Europe, but not here in the UK. They're going to dump their product at cheap prices. Why cheap? Because they don't pay their workers to do it. And Miliband now is determined to overturn that amendment.
Wow.
And he
so what does that mean then?
labour.
So are you saying that if Labour MPs support this bill, then they are supporting slave labour being used to make some of the solar and other panels that we import into the country? That's basically what you're saying.
Yes, the simple line is, on Tuesday, Labour MPs will be asked to vote for slave labour in our supply chains. And I say it like that because that is exactly what will happen. Miliband knows that. The government knows that. It is a mad policy which is seeking to rush this net zero programme by using the most persecuted group of people possible. I mean, they carry out executions on a rate you cannot understand here in the UK. It is a brutal thing. So on Tuesday, Labour will be asked to vote for the introduction of slave labour into UK supply chains.
All right, well, we'll be watching that one closely. Of course, we've still got this Chinese super embassy going ahead in Tower Hamlets. David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, has said, well, we're building it because it's in Beijing's interests. What's your reaction to that?
Well, just a load of old rubbish, really. I've had 2 protests out there. We've had 4,000 and 5,000 people.
Yeah.
So the key to this is that the government has called it in, because twice now Tower Hamlets has rejected it. None of the residents want it. And by the way, there are 200 British citizens who have flats on that site. So if they give that to China, they will be living on Chinese territory. I mean, absurd, right? It's right across the big communication lines that lie underground between Canary Wharf, central London and the city. And the security services we know said, we don't like this at all because they'll be able to tap into that and disrupt it. And the third element to this, which is really quite peculiar, is that the Chinese themselves want a super embassy and they'll be stuffing it with another 200 people, all spies, of course, which is what they want to do. Here we have one...
All spies?
Pretty much.
OK.
Every time they have a super embassy anywhere in the world, extraterritorial activity bumps right up. And the one last bit, which is the key, the Met Police originally said this is not the right location because all those arterial roads, etc., you block everything off. They said protests would stop all traffic if we weren't careful. They held that until it was called in. Suddenly, they've reversed that and said it's OK. We've had 2 protests there, one 4, one 5,000, and the roads were shut.
So do you think we're going to win this war, though?
The Met have to be honest about this and tell the government this is the wrong place for an embassy.
But at the moment, it looks like it is going to go ahead.
Well, the government is in kowtow, bended knee. You've seen this on slave labour, you see it on Chinese production, you see it on this idea that we salve our consciences because China burns coal and fuel, dirty fuel, to make all the net zero stuff for us. I mean, it's an absurd position to be in.
Can we move on to benefits? Because I was quite struck by this pie chart in the Sunday Times. Government spending in 24 to 25. Have a look at that then. So benefits bill now up to 314 billion. You compare that with health, which is at 202 billion. That is a staggering growth, isn't it? When you were Work and Pension Secretary, you managed to get that bill down by, I believe, 31 billion.
Yeah, roughly, yeah.
Introducing universal credit. When you listened to Liz Kendall, your successor in the House of Commons this week, what did you think? 5 billion off? I mean, it just seems like a drop in the ocean to our audience.
I'm kind of with Liz Kendall as well. She's got to try and get these numbers down. But we put a programme out at the Centre for Social Justice, which would have yielded her over 30 billion in savings over a period, but they would have got the savings down by getting people back to work. There's one thing that's happening which gives them huge opportunity here. The sickness benefit was always outside of universal credit. I couldn't get Osborne to do it. I couldn't get others. The last government started bringing it in. That means all the sickness benefit people who never got seen by anybody at all now will be seen by jobs advisors who will now start putting them under pressure to get them into work. That means they could, if they really accelerated that, get real savings by getting people into work. Sickness benefit now, majority that call for it are mental health. Of those, the majority are depression and anxiety, which are treatable conditions. What's the number one treatment? Work. The health department has said work is a treatment for depression and anxiety. So you can maximise the pressure on people to go back to work and to take up their jobs.
On that note, Jeremy Hunt, your Conservative colleague, the former Chancellor, has written a piece next to this pie chart that I've just mentioned. The most sensible starting point would be to remove non-severe mental health conditions from the benefits assessment process. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that's fine.
Should you get benefits if you have mild anxiety or mild depression?
Let me just tell you, 84% of GPs, when asked about this, said they think that we are medicalising the ups and downs of normal life.
What do you think?
I think they're right on this. I think far too often marginal cases will be claiming depression and anxiety. We all feel bad about life at times. The key thing is not to lock them away on sickness benefit, which makes it worse. What you want is, as I said, work is the single best treatment for someone depressed or anxious, because it gets them back into meeting other people, learning about skills, etc.
So you do agree with Jeremy Hunt to an extent?
Well, I think we've got to review the whole idea.
He said non-severe mental health conditions should not be part of the benefits assessment
the problem always is when you start defining something like that, who is actually going to adjudicate what that means? I think now it's back, it's in universal credit or coming into universal credit. There is no question that this sort of process can now be engaged. Get rid of the work capability assessment. Say, we're going to talk to everybody about doing work of some sort, even part-time. Try and get them in, because if they can do it, it's better for them, and they will almost certainly come off the benefit. So getting people back into work is the key element. By the way, the 5 billion I was puzzled about. Why, when we're talking of much bigger savings, is she talking 5 billion? Then the penny dropped. In a rush, by the way, because they were never planning to have this in the spring statement originally. And then, of course, I realised they needed the 5 billion in the spring statement so the OBR wouldn't rule that she had broken her own fiscal rule, which is that she's meant to keep a certain sum of money available to herself. That's gone now under the mess she got into in the first budget. So now she's demanded quickly that the department come up with a single figure. 5 billion is very small for the department, but that now gets her off the hook with the OBR.
Understood. Let's just move on to foreign affairs. What's your assessment of Donald Trump's handling of Vladimir Putin? Because you've been quite critical of the US president in the week.
Well, I just think I see Steve Witkoff, his guy who's gone over there for the negotiations, has come out saying what a good guy Putin is.
Well, he said that Starmer is posturing and it's just pros, this idea of having a coalition of the willing. He couldn't name the 5 Ukrainian territories under Russia's control.
It's like everything else. I'm beginning to find that some of these people are just a mouthy bunch that go out and say what they think. You know, I don't know whether it's what Trump thinks, but I do know that too many people around President Trump think it's a field day for saying what you think about what is a very tough situation. I say to any of them, by the way, Whitcroft as well, come with me. I'll take you to the front line in Ukraine. You go and see what this rather nice guy has been doing.
Yeah.
Destroying lives, destroying homes, bombing flats for no reason in the middle of towns, you know, pinching kids, taking them back to Russia, trying to make them into Russians. I don't know what world he's living in, by the way, but it's certainly a world cosseted away from anything.
But
Come with me to the front line and I'll show him.
What's Trump playing at here? Because you presumably weren't particularly impressed with the outcome of that 90-minute call.
Well,
the ceasefire that wasn't really a ceasefire.
No, well, it's not a ceasefire.
Is he a bad negotiator? What's your assessment of the president?
I have to keep reminding them, the man they're dealing with is an old KGB operative.
Yeah.
The one thing they know and are taught straight along is how you negotiate. They know how to string out a negotiation. They know how to refuse to do something and then give you a little bit at the end, which is what he's done. They called this a ceasefire. It's not a ceasefire. Putin has agreed that they won't fire at each other's energy resources, OK? But I said, why has he done that suddenly? The answer is because the Ukrainians are beginning to knock out his fuel plants and all the other bits and pieces. Now he's worried. So what he does, he wants to put a straitjacket around them, but not stop fighting. So they've taken that away and come away basically with worse than nothing, an advantage to Putin. So I don't see how Zelensky can possibly accept that. It does seem to me to be bizarre. If they want a ceasefire is very simple. Stop fighting. That's the long and the short of it, right? No conditions on it. It's a peace treaty that you start discussing negotiations.
Quick final couple of questions on the Tories. How's Kemi Badenoch doing? You backed her. Why aren't you in her shadow cabinet? Doesn't she need a bit more wisdom and experience in there?
Well, that's up to her. But my general view is that I'm busy elsewhere.
Yes, I know, but you would add some heft, would you not?
Well, that's kind of you to say so. I don't know. I'd simply know where the target lies in each of these cases. But I think she's
doing all right. 48% say they don't think she's doing.
Well, that's because, you know, I have to tell you, the leader of the opposition is the toughest job you get in politics. Getting known, getting noticed is very difficult, particularly when there's a crisis on. The government gets all the notice. I say to my party, you've just got to allow her to get the time to get on the front foot. I think she has all the essentials. She has courage, she has guts, she has intelligence, and she has aggression when she needs it. The key question is she's got to pick the right targets and build that profile. And I'm old enough to remember Mrs. Thatcher when she got selected as opposition leader. Lots of the Tory party said hopeless, shrill, not very good. The woman that bestrode the world like a colossus didn't start like that. She developed into the right position, and Kemi can do the same.
All right, Sir Ian Duncan Smith, thank you very much indeed for joining us on GB News this morning. Great to speak to you as ever. Coming up next, I'm going to be speaking to the former head of the British Army, Lord Dannatt, and I'm going to be discussing the economy with Gerard Lyons, who knows his onions when it comes to our fiscal situation. So don't go anywhere. This is the Camilla Tominey Show, only on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop star to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now, I'm furious with our director this morning because I said this is not breaking news, and so he's gone all out.
He's gone all
breaking
out.
news everywhere. Because guess what, ladies and gents? The lineup for Glastonbury 2025 has been released.
It's great.
Who cares?
It's
frankly?
great.
Who cares?
I really like it.
I couldn't give a monkeys.
Right, I'll tell you.
An Arctic monkeys.
Well, they're not playing, are they?
I've no idea.
I don't think they are. But US pop star Olivia Rodrigo.
Who?
She's very good. British band, the 1975.
Who?
Are going to headline.
And Neil Young, who many of us will remember from decades and decades.
Is he there?
Who is 80 and he's playing.
Right.
And
good for him.
Well, yeah, but that's something, because apparently Charlie XCX is playing. Who?
Well, she just won 5 Brit Awards.
She did win the Brits,
yes.
absolutely.
Well,
so she's very good.
Stephen, she is a real amazing person.
This is a very brat boy summer.
I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means.
And a brat boy summer.
This is growing out my pocket.
It looks like a bouquet.
Alanis Morissette, who I have heard of, Fatboy Slim and the Scissor Sisters.
And Rod
playing.
Stewart.
Rod Stewart, yeah.
And the Prodigy.
Even you will have heard of Rod Stewart.
I'm not.
The Prodigy, you would have heard of.
The Prodigy, you would have heard of.
Fatboy Slim, Snow Patrol.
Snow Patrol.
Snow Patrol.
They
Snow Patrol do the song for Grey's Anatomy. It's brilliant.
I've never seen
The Libertines.
Anyway,
Maccabees.
as
I
you can
think
see,
it's a great lineup.
Alex Armstrong and Scarlett Maguire are here for this latest on the breaking news this morning. You couldn't give two hoots, could you, Scarlett?
I will not be going to Glastonbury, but my son probably will be for the sort of 15th time in a row.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This spring, the Chancellor steps up to the dispatch box to make a statement. But what kind of statement will it be?
Taxes, spending, growth, benefits, cost of living. What's changing? And more importantly, how does it affect you?
Does she have the headroom to make headway?
Will it ease the squeeze or tighten the grip?
Will businesses boom or struggle to survive?
And does the spring statement have real impact, or is it just political posturing?
GB News brings you the analysis that matters. Just what it means for your money, your home, your future.
The Spring Statement 2025, Wednesday on GB News.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Joining me now is the former head of the British Army, Lord Dannatt. Lovely to see you this morning, Lord Dannatt. Can we just talk? I don't know if you caught my interview with Ian Duncan Smith earlier, but he was being quite critical of Steve Witkoff. This is the envoy to President Trump for Ukraine. First of all, because he couldn't name 5 Ukrainian territories under Russia's control, but also for criticising Starmer's coalition of the willing as posture and pose. What do you make of that interview he's given to Tucker Carlson?
Well, Camilla, good morning. Steve Witkoff is one of those people who is manifestly out of his depth on the world stage, masquerading as an envoy of the American president. We all know that he's just a chum of Donald Trump's. They play golf together. He's a businessman. He's the sort of person that Trump likes. But he's out of his depth, and talking on that radio show just indicated, because he couldn't mention, he talked about 5 places. Well, it's 4 oblasts, and Crimea is completely separate. So we have to take sort of things that he says with a pinch of salt. But the trouble is, it's dangerous. And they are listening to Putin, they're talking to Putin, they're recycling Putin's arguments. And frankly, it's just undermining day by day the position of Zelensky, the position of Ukraine, which is worrying in itself. But frankly, it's worrying for the security of Europe. And that's something we should all be extraordinarily concerned about.
It does strike me as bizarre that this is, the US president's kind of point man on Ukraine and Russia, and he doesn't even know the geography of the area. What's your analysis of Donald Trump's handling of Vladimir Putin? We haven't spoken since that 90-minute phone call. Trump emerges seemingly victorious, saying it's wonderful that they've come to this deal on not attacking energy and other infrastructure. It's not a ceasefire, though, is it?
No, it's not a ceasefire at all. A 90-minute conversation out of which a few shreds have emerged. I mean, I think, again, this is Trump trying to be the businessman, trying to be the deal maker, trying to indicate that actually his friend and his business associate, Vladimir Putin, he can do business with. But it's worse than smoke and mirrors. It's downright dangerous. And as you were discussing with Ian Duncan Smith, the only element that came out of that conversation was this very marginal ceasefire point about not attacking infrastructure. And Ian Duncan Smith was actually quite right, because this is now a point of vulnerability for Vladimir Putin. The longer-range weapons that the Ukrainians are using very successfully are starting to do real damage to the Russian economy. And I think there's a wider point there that after 3 years, and actually longer than that, because sanctions started long before that, there is an accumulative effect which is being felt by the Russians, not the least of which, of course, also is the effect of what's happening to them on the battlefield. Yes, people say in one breath, actually, the Russians are doing quite well, but my goodness, their casualty rate is huge. Reasonable estimates now are that they've lost 250,000 dead. about 1 million injured as well. Those are huge figures. So we mustn't be suckered by what we're hearing from Trump's envoys, effectively spouting Putin's language. But bear in mind that Putin is taking some pressure as well.
Lord Dannatt, you just described Vladimir Putin as one of Donald Trump's friends. I mean, is that how you view their relationship, one of friendship between the US president and the Russian president?
Well, friendship is probably going too strongly, but Trump would like to see Putin as someone he can do business with, a colleague in the business world, if you like, and perhaps that's a little bit stopping short of calling him a friend. But he believes he can deal with him man-to-man, conversation, open conversation, and that they can meet mutually beneficial objectives. And the trouble is, those mutually beneficial objectives are at the cost of Ukraine's sovereignty, Ukraine's independence, and by extension are very damaging to security and peace in Europe. And that is the thing that we should be really concerned about, and concerned that Trump is taking the United States progressively away from Europe, thereby weakening NATO, and thereby again playing into Putin's agenda. Bear in mind, as Ian Duncan Smith was saying, scrape Putin to the core, you get an unreformed KGB colonel whose beloved Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact was defeated in the late 1980s by the solidarity of NATO and the solidarity of the West, underpinned by America, and of course led by Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan at the time. That's what Putin would most love to damage and to shatter and to break now that cohesion in the West. And that's really damaging for us Europeans.
Talking of European security, can we just have a chat about Heathrow? I think at the moment the government's still investigating, along with the security services, as to whether there was anything suspicious about the fire, whether it may have been sabotage. I'm getting the increasing impression that they think not. However, are you concerned about the vulnerability of some of our critical infrastructure?
Well, I think the answer after the Heathrow episode of a few days ago, one has to say yes. It is quite incredible that one substation could be taken down or come down. We'll have to wait for the negotiation to see whether there was a malign hand in there, but have the effect of closing Heathrow Airport with the huge disruption. Now, if I was a KGB operative, I would be looking around at other weak points in this country to decide where I might launch an attack, because that episode that happened at Heathrow, if it was a malign operation, was a very clever one. It was a very well targeted one and had a demonstrative effect. Now, whether it was an accident or whether it was sabotage, we don't know. The authorities are suggesting it was an accident, but it does underline the need for greater resilience in so many aspects of our national infrastructure, and attacking the power grid and attacking our cybersecurity, or preserving our cybersecurity. These are other areas that we need to invest very heavily in and be very cautious about.
Yes, I mean, there may be a call now, considering the climate that we're living in, with everything going on the world stage, of perhaps having more of a military presence at some of these key infrastructure, critical infrastructure building sites. Do you think that would be a good idea? May not have enough troops to cover the ground.
Well, Camilla, you rather answered your own question there.
Yeah.
We certainly haven't got the troops to do that. But go back to the days of the Cold War. We had key installations and troops were earmarked to protect them. So the principle is probably right. But I think that that's probably not the answer at the present moment. It's actually not practical at the present moment with the number of troops that we haven't got. But I think a very careful survey needs to be done of where the critical nodes are in our national infrastructure and make sure that they are well protected, and to make sure also that there is redundancy, that if this thing goes out, then something else can cut in. And whether it's power stations, whether it's, all the critical aspects of our national infrastructure need to be looked at very carefully, and redundancy thought through extremely carefully.
Lord Dannatt, we need to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Camilla.
Thank you. I'm getting ahead of myself. It's only 10:42 and we've still got a lot to come because I'm going to be speaking to a senior fellow at the Centre for Policy Studies, Gerard Lyons, who's an economic expert, and he can talk us through what he expects to see in the spring statement on Wednesday and the impact it might have on your household budget. So don't go anywhere. This is the Camilla Tominey Show, only on GB News.
I forecast a perfect holiday in the sun.
Weather looking good then?
For sure, and no worries about our travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
After a wet and windy couple of weeks for Spain and Portugal, there's some dry weather on offer and plenty of sunshine across the eastern Mediterranean too. Still some showers affecting the far north of Spain and Portugal and some heavy downpours across parts of Italy and Croatia over the next couple of days. But across the eastern parts of the Mediterranean, parts of Turkey and Cyprus, plenty of sunshine on offer. The best of the sunshine through the rest of the week, though, definitely across the Canary Islands, and highs here likely to reach around 21 or 22.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. Another changeable day is on the cards for many of us. Rain gradually starting to ease, but there will still be some heavy showers around. The rain that we've seen across the northern half of the UK is gradually going to ease as we head towards the afternoon. Still rather cloudy for much of northern England, eastern parts of Scotland, but where we do see some sunshine, particularly across the southeast of England, we are likely to see some quite heavy showers bubbling up through the afternoon. There could be some thunder and hail mixed in here too, perhaps some localised flooding in places. And for northwest Scotland and parts of Northern Ireland, there will be some sunshine too. Another mild day, temperatures well above average in the south, 17, 18, perhaps 19 degrees. And even in the north, those temperatures a little above average for the time of year. Into Sunday evening, we see those showers persisting for a time across the southeast, so continuing to see some heavy downpours in places and really quite cloudy across much of England and Wales through Sunday evening. Across parts of Northern Ireland and western parts of Scotland, though, plenty of clear skies to end the day, but generally a little bit cloudier across the northeast of Scotland, so some outbreaks of rain for Shetland and Orkney for a time. As we go through the rest of Sunday evening, any of those showers we see across the very far south gradually start to push their way offshore, so turning a little drier for much of England and Wales into the start of Monday morning. Perhaps the odd outbreak of rain across the very far southeast, but further north, a much drier picture and plenty of clear skies on offer for Northern Ireland and much of Scotland. And likely to turn quite chilly here, perhaps a touch of frost in places, but generally staying that little bit milder under that cloud further south and further east, temperatures in the high single figures. So a bright but chilly start across parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland, a cloudier start across England and Wales, but that cloud gradually starting to fizzle out as we go through the afternoon. So some sunshine developing here, maybe one or two isolated showers, but it should be staying dry for most places. That sunshine turning hazy across the northwest though as we see this weather front arriving, so some heavy downpours across northwest Scotland, and temperatures will be down a touch on what we saw over the weekend, but still a little above average for the time of year.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop star to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. Let's talk about the economy now. With me is Senior Fellow at the Centre for Policy Studies, Gerard Lyons. Gerard, lovely to see you this morning. Thank you for your time. Just give us an overview without any politics involved, because I've spoken to Darren Jones, I've spoken to Mel Stride this morning. What's your objective analysis of the state of the UK economy right now?
Well, the economy is not in great shape. It's almost stagnating. It's lost momentum since the election, largely because of the loss of confidence and also the tax increases. As we've moved through this year, the external environment has not helped, particularly the uncertainty with President Trump's tariffs. So we enter a backdrop ahead of this week where the economy is in difficult shape. The Bank of England, ideally, in other times, would have cut interest rates more aggressively, and that would have provided a helping hand. But because inflation is sticky, the Bank of England's hands are tied. So basically, the economy is not in great shape. The policy levers don't really allow you much room for manoeuvre because debt is high, but the budget deficit is not getting any better. So hence the Chancellor can't provide help. And as I've mentioned, the Bank of England can't really provide much of a boost.
And how close are we to recession? We know that the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibility, is predicted to halve that growth forecast from 2% to 1%. There's talk that we are in a GDP per capita recession already. What's your prediction for how this might play out this year?
OK, well, I don't think we are in recession. I think the economy this year will grow around 1%. If you're looking for crumbs of comfort, it's this, that even though people and businesses, when they're asked, are quite cautious about the outlook, when they're asked about their own individual situation, they tend to be more upbeat. And in the past, that's often been a better guide of the underlying stability of the economy. Let's put it this way. Even though unemployment may well rise this year, and that will be obviously difficult for those people who are hit, for most people, there will be gains in real incomes. That is, their wages are currently rising by more than the rate of inflation. They might not feel great, but at least they feel able to cope. Similarly with businesses, small businesses face a big strain as we enter the new fiscal year because of the tax increases announced last autumn. But generally speaking, businesses say they're more upbeat about their own situation. So the question is whether they have the resilience to cope. But overall, the economy doesn't have momentum. And as we entered this week, the challenge is this, that the OBR, the official forecaster, is obliged by Parliament to come out with a new forecast every 6 months. That's the main focus this week. That forecast this year is likely to show their growth forecast, not the 2% that they expected last October, but maybe nearer to 1 to 1.2%. In addition, they're going to be more cautious about the outlook of inflation. Therefore, interest rates are unlikely to fall as much as they had hoped. Against that backdrop, the Chancellor, because of her self-imposed fiscal rules, will have to tweak the fiscal numbers. That is, cutting spending, as we've seen announced over the last week, and possibly raising taxes. But the key thing is that last autumn, the Chancellor said that she is moving to only one major fiscal event each year, which is going to be the autumn budget. So that implies, and we'll have to wait and see, that this is pretty much a downbeat or not a big fiscal event compared to normal. It might not be the sort of sort of loads of different changes. Her speech is expected to be 30 minutes, not over an hour. So it's more tweaks. And the big news is later in this year in the autumn budget in October.
So we know that she's got this kind of Hobson's choice between cutting government spending, which a Labour Chancellor doesn't want to do because you get a huge backlash from Labour backbenchers saying, no, we don't want austerity to return. She's then said that she doesn't want to increase taxes anymore because, let's be honest, everybody's feeling as if they're overtaxed as it is. But presumably she could introduce some stealth taxes.
Yeah, probably not. She'll probably wait until the autumn. It doesn't only depend on what the OBR, the official forecaster, says about this year, but it also depends what they say about the next 3 to 4 years. If they cut their growth forecast for this year, but then expect the economy to bounce back 2, 3, 4 years' time, then the Chancellor won't have to do too much. If the OBR decides to not only cut their forecast for this year, but to say, goodness, we're really pessimistic about the next 3 to 4 years, then that puts the Chancellor in a far more difficult situation. The likelihood the OBR will tweak their numbers and wait until the autumn. One thing that she could do on stealth taxes is to reverse one of the things she announced last autumn, which is the personal allowances, which are not going up in line with inflation. That was a decision of the previous Conservative government, and that is in place for the next 2 to 3 years. Then the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, last autumn said that she will allow those to go up in line with inflation towards the end of this Parliament. It's possible she could actually reverse that. But generally speaking, she will try and keep those tax changes, I think, to a minimum this week, focusing more on the spending side. But the big changes will be delayed until the autumn in the budget and after this summer's comprehensive spending review.
Sure. I mean, I suppose some can argue that if the tax thresholds continue to be frozen, which they will be, then in a way we're being taxed more by stealth just because of fiscal drag. You mentioned earlier Donald Trump. Can we discuss the Trump effect on the UK economy? Because interestingly, the Chancellor has been using the language of the world has changed. How much can she actually blame a US president that came into power on the 20th of January for some of the impact that the Labour budget has had?
Well, it adds, obviously Donald Trump's policies add to uncertainty, but much of the current problems in the UK are a legacy of what happened in the last 6 months of last year. The reality is that this government inherited a very difficult situation. The debt levels were already very high. The economy didn't really have momentum. But what we then had at the end of last year were two big problems. One was both the Prime Minister and the Chancellor talked things down ahead of the budget. And in any economy, not just the UK, the outlook depends on the interaction between fundamentals, policy and confidence. And confidence is the most difficult thing to predict. But confidence was hit hard, so people delayed their spending. Companies also thought twice about investment plans. Then after that, we had the budget itself, and that announced tax increases. Now, the budget last October did have a very good positive about boosting investment, but the benefits of that come through 5, 6, 7, 8 years to come. What we had immediately was the tax increases, and they will actually hit this April, but many firms have been preparing for those in the last few months. So the combination of those factors left the UK economy less resilient to cope with Donald Trump's proposed tariff increases. Monday of this week, the Ambassador Mandelson wrote a very good article in the Hill paper on Washington. The business secretary met the commerce secretary on Tuesday. So it's quite clear behind the scenes that the UK is trying to maneuver itself to avoid the full impact of tariffs. And if it does it well, then I think we should be able to avoid the full impact. So coming back to your question, the impact of President Trump is indirect, either in terms of global trade and indirect through the markets.
All right, Gerard, and very briefly, just to conclude, because we're running out of time, you know, some people are panicking, saying, oh, my goodness, you shouldn't have a stocks and shares ISA, you should have a cash one because of the Trump effect. That's perhaps being a bit hysterical.
Yeah, look, the most important thing is what's called time in the market, not timing the market. You can't always time the turns, but what you actually do is actually have a diversified global portfolio, and you actually think, these hits aren't great, but also let's see how it turns out in the States. With President Trump, there's good news, bad news, and a lot of uncertainty. Here in the UK, it's about controlling the controllables, and hopefully we don't get hit by tax increases again this week. But what will likely happen is all the big decisions will have to wait until the October budget.
Okay. Gerard Lyons, thank you very much indeed for your expertise this morning. Well, coming up next is Michael Portillo. And Michael, we're just waiting, aren't we, for Pope Francis to make his first public appearance since he went into hospital. That was on Valentine's Day, suffering from double pneumonia. We're just looking at the scenes now at that Gemelli hospital in Italy. Michael.
Camilla, yes, good morning. Yes, because the Pope is due to appear at roughly 11 o'clock, we're going to have a rather unconventional handover, you and I, and a rather unconventional beginning to my programme, I dare say. Just while we're waiting for the Pope to appear, which might be at 11 o'clock, which is about 4 minutes' time, I'll just tell you that on my programme, you've just been discussing the spring budget next week. I've got a panel here which is standing by ready to discuss that very subject. And later on, they're going to be talking about whether our school curriculum needs to be decolonised. I have been very struck watching this series on Netflix called Adolescence. And I'm going to be discussing on my programme both the extraordinary way in which the programme is made and acted, and also some of the themes that the programme raises. This last week saw the death of a wonderful man called Paddy Hemingway, who was a Battle of Britain pilot. Actually, he was a pilot from the withdrawal at Dunkirk all the way through to 1945. He survived 4 bailouts from aircraft and several more aircraft crashes, an extraordinary figure, and he was the last of what Winston Churchill called the few. That is to say, the people who, in the air, defended us against the Luftwaffe during the Second World War. So we're going to be reviewing his life and also what he represents in terms of that cadre of young people who so willingly gave their lives, and so many of whom lost them. Extraordinary that he lived through to the age of 105. And there's always some food and drink on my programme, Camilla, so there's a restaurant opened up in St James's in London called Claddle, which is actually the twin of a restaurant in Tel Aviv, and it offers Mediterranean food and Mediterranean wine. So I shall be extremely happy with that. And once I've seen the Pope appear at this balcony in Rome, no doubt I shall be thinking about the Mediterranean particularly strongly.
Indeed, this footage, Michael, is bringing new meaning to the phrase, does the Pope have a balcony? Because as is ever the case, when we do wait for the pontiff, we usually are waiting for him to appear on a balcony. And when I was looking back at his history of, medical problems over the course of the last few weeks, suffering from double pneumonia, and I also hadn't realised, I mean, he's 88 years old. The public haven't really seen him at all since February the 14th. We think he's going to come out and give the crowd a blessing, which will be quite something, because although he wasn't intubated, I believe, Michael, we have had periods where this has been very touch and go.
No, it clearly has been touch and go. One of the things that's been remarkable is how frank the Vatican has been. We've been given very accurate, I mean, almost painfully accurate descriptions of what His Holiness has been suffering from. Therefore, the fact that he may appear on this balcony in a few moments is all the more remarkable and will surely have an immense impact on the Catholic Church, the Catholic faith, all around the world. Talking about appearing on balconies, though, this comes just before Easter, and there's no period which is more demanding on a pontiff than Easter. Easter Sunday is April the 20th. So there will be speculation that even if he appears on this balcony now, will he be able to perform his duties as pontiff during the Easter period? The surgeons at the Gemelli Hospital, we're looking at the balcony of the Gemelli Hospital at the moment, the surgeons are saying that he needs to rest for 2 months. And this also, of course, raises the question as to whether he will meet His Majesty the King, Her Majesty the Queen. That meeting is scheduled for the 8th of April, so that really is just around the corner now. At least Easter Sunday is still, just about a month away, isn't it?
Yeah, that sounds to me to be rather ambitious if doctors are saying that effectively he needs to be on bed rest at the Vatican for the next 2 months. It's interesting, though, isn't it, that correlation between the royals and indeed religious figures working well beyond retirement age, and it's because of their wisdom and experience that so many people gravitate towards them. Of course, people of the Catholic faith, but of all faiths, in admiration of somebody working well into their 80s. But as a consequence, you have to take care of people in this position. There'll be huge pressure on him, as you say, to kind of put on his Easter service and to be among his people for that very significant Christian festival. But at the same time, at the age of 88, you've got to take every precaution you can with his health.
I'm sure that for the vast majority of the Catholics, even an appearance, even if he were not able to say very much during the Easter period, would be extremely valued. It would be the source of a great deal of cheer. Now, something is happening, I think, Camilla. The applause is rippling around the crowd. I saw somebody, but it certainly wasn't His Holiness, moving there behind the window.